What if the forest you walked into became your grave? Summer 1994 marked the moment 16-year-old Jason Whitaker convinced his parents to trust him with something they would regret forever. He wanted to camp alone. Jason was always the adventurous type, a boy who pushed his bike farther than his mother felt comfortable with, who collected free maps from gas stations just to trace the winding paths of mountain highways with his finger. He spoke constantly about independence, about showing everyone he was capable of more than just living a quiet suburban life in Tacoma. When he begged his parents for permission to take a short 2-night camping trip in the Cascade foothills, they hesitated hard. He was their only child, barely more than a kid. But Jason had thought through every detail. He borrowed his father's old green lantern, stuffed a red metal thermos his grandmother had gifted him into his pack, and slipped his treasured Sony Walkman inside his backpack with several cassettes. He also grabbed a disposable Kodak camera, the kind with bright yellow cardboard casing he bought at the corner pharmacy using money from mowing lawns all summer. His plan felt straightforward. Hike into the Carbon River Valley, pitch his small green dome tent beside the water, spend 2 nights by himself, and return home Sunday afternoon. It was just a few miles from the trailhead, an easy walk compared to the backcountry adventures his father used to tell stories about. Jason promised he would stay safe, promised he would phone from the payphone at the ranger station once he made it back. On the morning he departed, Jason's parents snapped a photograph of him in the driveway, his backpack almost as tall as his body. He smiled huge, holding the lantern like some kind of trophy. To them, this represented a rite of passage, a chance to trust their son and watch him mature. His mother admitted years later that she lingered at the door long after he left, straining to hear the fading echo of his footsteps. A fisherman remembered spotting him that afternoon along the Carbon River Trail. His cap tugged down low, a flannel shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. Jason had paused to ask about fishing spots even though he carried no fishing rod. "Just curious," he had said, grinning in that clumsy way teenagers do. The fisherman recalled thinking how young the boy appeared to be wandering out there alone. But Jason had appeared confident, sure of his destination. By evening, he had located a clearing next to the river, where the trees parted just enough to allow sunlight to wash across the mossy earth. It was the sort of place that made a young person feel secure, a slice of wilderness that still offered the reassurance of flowing water close by. He erected his green tent, organized his belongings, and even positioned his lantern and thermos outside as if arranging furniture in a room. He jotted down a few thoughts in a small spiral notebook he brought along. Those words were later discovered by investigators in his bedroom. "Feels good out here. Quiet but not scary. Want to do more of this." That night, Jason would have rolled out his sleeping bag, put his headphones on, and played cassette tapes of Nirvana and Pearl Jam as the forest surrounding him turned dark. He was a child of the Pacific Northwest, after all, with music sewn into his identity. Perhaps he sat near the fire glow, drinking warm coffee from his thermos, dreaming about the adventures that awaited him once he showed his parents he could manage this first experience of independence. The wilderness held him in stillness. Stars emerged above the jagged outline of pines. The river murmured nearby, and Jason's lantern cast flickering light against the nylon fabric of his tent. In that moment, everything probably felt normal, even peaceful. A boy on the verge of manhood, testing himself in the most basic way he understood. No one could have predicted that this would be the last confirmed night of Jason Whitaker's life. When Jason failed to arrive home by Sunday evening, his parents attempted to calm themselves with logic. Maybe he had chosen to stay an extra night. Maybe he had gotten caught up in the joy of being on his own. But when the hours stretched past midnight and the payphone near the ranger station remained silent, worry hardened into fear. By sunrise, they contacted the sheriff's office. Within hours, search and rescue teams were sent to the Carbon River Valley. It was not uncommon for hikers to miss return times, but Jason's age and inexperience sparked immediate alarm. Volunteers, deputies, and even local loggers participated, searching trails with radios crackling and dogs straining on their leashes. Helicopters pounded the air above, their searchlights sweeping the canopy in expanding circles. But there were no tracks, no equipment, no tent. The forest revealed nothing. Rangers were familiar with the area. They guided teams to the most probable campsites, inspected along the riverbanks, watched for smoke that might suggest a fire. They discovered only the typical silence of summer woods. Jason's name rang through the trees for days. Searchers yelling, dogs barking, whistles cutting the quiet. No response ever came. Jason's parents established camp at the trailhead, refusing to abandon hope. They stood beside the Subaru they had driven in, gripping a recent photo of their son and distributing flyers to anyone who walked by. 16 years old, missing since Saturday. Please help us find him. Reporters showed up by midweek, pushing microphones into the parents' faces, asking questions no grieving family should ever face. His mother's voice broke as she stated, "He is not a runaway. He wanted to come home." Investigators explored every angle. Friends were questioned. Jason was well regarded, a bit reserved, no record of trouble. Teachers described him as dependable, a solid student. There were no indications of problems at home. He had departed willingly for the camping trip, bringing basic gear, intending to return. There was no proof he had faked a disappearance. Some searchers whispered about accidents. Maybe he had fallen into the Carbon River, fast-flowing and surprisingly deep in spots. The current could pull away even strong swimmers, trapping them under fallen logs. But typically, bodies appeared within days. Jason's never did. Others guessed a fall, perhaps off one of the slippery ridges that bordered the valley. Crevices and gorges could consume a person entirely, yet no ripped fabric, no piece of gear, no mark of impact ever appeared. Theories grew like shadows. A few locals muttered about predators, though mountain lions were uncommon in that section of forest and attacks more uncommon still. A deputy privately confessed he worried about something else. People vanish out here sometimes. They step off the trail and it is like the woods just swallow them. Weeks went by. Searchers widened their search area, moving deeper into the Cascades, charting every trail, every side ravine. Still nothing. Helicopters finally stopped flying. Volunteers gradually returned home. The official search was reduced, then halted. Jason's parents were left standing at the trailhead by themselves, staring at a forest that had consumed their son completely. His disappearance rattled the community. Town meetings were packed with arguments. Should teenagers be permitted to camp alone? Was the ranger service at fault? Some argued Jason must have run away, hitchhiking to Seattle or beyond, his story ending in anonymity rather than tragedy. His parents rejected the notion. They knew their son. He had not left to run away. He had left to prove himself. By autumn, Jason's name had vanished from the headlines, replaced by fresher tragedies. But for those who had searched, and for the family who lived with an empty seat at the dinner table, the silence of the Carbon River Valley never lost its heaviness. Years went by. Each summer brought hikers and campers into the same area of woods. Each autumn, leaves covered the trails, pine needles blanketed the forest floor, and snow locked the valley in silence. Jason's fate stayed frozen in mystery. It would require more than a decade for the forest to surrender its secret. 12 years went by before anyone mentioned Jason Whitaker's name in the Carbon River Valley again. It was summer 2006 when two hikers, Mark Phillips and his girlfriend Dana Lou, chose to explore an overgrown service road on the north side of the valley, an area long abandoned after flood damage years before. Fallen trees and moss-covered rocks had reclaimed the path. The couple wandered it out of curiosity, photographing ferns and rusted trail markers swallowed by vegetation. By late afternoon, they came across what appeared to be a mound of earth and debris beneath a tangle of pine branches. But when Dana brushed her hand against it, she felt fabric, green, faded, and rough to the touch. Kneeling, she pulled away layers of needles and soil until a zipper appeared. "It is a tent," Mark said quietly, the words sticking in his throat. The structure had collapsed inward, one corner crushed beneath a fallen limb. Its nylon walls were stained with mold, but clearly man-made. Curiosity shifted to unease as they uncovered more. A rusted lantern sat half-buried beside the tent, its glass cracked. A red thermos, dented but whole, rested a few feet away. Nearby, a decayed backpack split open to show scraps of fabric and a warped plastic cassette case. When Dana lifted the edge of the tent flap, a wave of damp air and something else, something sour and old, poured out. She stumbled back, realizing what she was seeing. A sleeping bag, darkened with age, curled around the unmistakable shape of human bones. They did not remain long enough to process it. Mark took one photo for authorities, his hands shaking before they backed away and radioed for help. The sheriff's department cordoned the area that evening. Crime scene technicians and forensic anthropologists arrived the next morning, their boots crunching through damp soil. The tent had collapsed years ago, half consumed by moss. It was remarkable that anything remained. Yet inside, among decayed nylon and soil, they found what time had tried to erase: Jason Whitaker's remains. His wallet, brittle but still readable, held a Washington state ID matching his name and birth date. The lantern, the red thermos, and the rusted Walkman all matched items described in the original missing person report. There was no question who they had found. News spread fast. Missing teen's tent discovered after 12 years. Reporters descended on the Carbon River Valley again, same as before. The headlines screamed louder than any truth could answer. Jason's parents, their hair now streaked with gray, faced the cameras and thanked the hikers who discovered what 100 trained searchers had somehow missed. His mother's voice shattered when she spoke. At least he was not taken far. He was right here the entire time. But discovery brought more questions than answers. How could a whole tent and body stay hidden so close to familiar trails for 12 long years? The search teams back in 1994 had covered that same valley completely, marking grids carefully, crossing the river dozens of times. The tent's location was not miles away. It sat less than half a mile from one of the original search roads. Forensic experts suggested that flooding might have hidden the site during those early years. The Carbon River was wild and unpredictable, prone to swelling during storms and burying low ground beneath debris. Fallen trees and erosion could have sealed the tent under layers of earth. Over time, as the forest shifted naturally, the covering loosened up, exposing what lay beneath. But certain details refused to fit the simple explanation. The zipper on the tent had been pulled closed from the inside. The lantern stood perfectly upright, not knocked over like a flood would do. The sleeping bag was zipped all the way up around Jason's body, his skeletal remains positioned like he had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. The coroner discovered no obvious signs of trauma, though time and decay had erased most of what could have been learned. Official cause of death remained undetermined. When the investigation wrapped up, the sheriff labeled it a tragic accident, probably exposure or hypothermia. But locals started whispering different explanations entirely. They pointed out that Jason's tent had been discovered on slightly higher ground than the surrounding floodplain, completely safe from water. They mentioned that the cassette tape inside the Walkman was damaged, yes, but that the faint magnetic line still held traces of recorded sound. One deputy, after the case file got sealed away, quietly told a reporter that when the audio lab attempted to recover the tape, the result was not music. It was static, broken up by faint rhythmic sounds, too regular to be wind, too soft to be actual words. The official report never included it, but it became the story that everyone remembered. After the forensic team completed its work, Jason's belongings were packed into boxes and labeled in evidence storage. His parents received only a few items back: the lantern, the thermos, and the Walkman. The tent and sleeping bag were kept by investigators, still damp and fragile, too broken down for display. But the cassette tape was something completely different. Though warped and stretched badly, the tape inside the Walkman had survived just enough to deserve analysis. It was shipped to an audio lab in Olympia, where technicians carefully unspooled it inch by inch, transferring what remained into a digital file. The first half was exactly as expected: music, a few recognizable songs, muffled and badly distorted. Pearl Jam's Elderly Woman behind the counter in a small town, Nirvana's All Apologies. Then the recording stopped abruptly, replaced by pure static. For nearly 10 seconds, the file was nothing but a wash of white noise. Then faintly, something else emerged. At first, the technicians brushed it off as tape warping, the sound of wind hitting a cheap microphone. But when they slowed down the playback, the static thickened into rhythm, a soft sequence of thuds like footsteps getting closer, then a voice or something that sounded like one, rising from beneath the distortion. Only 3 syllables, impossible to understand but undeniably human, and then complete silence. The lab report labeled it anomalous audio artifacts consistent with environmental interference. Still, the rumor leaked into the public anyway. The sheriff denied any such detail existed at all, but an anonymous source posted a short clip online weeks later. The sound, barely audible, spread like absolute wildfire. 3 indistinct syllables repeated endlessly in the hiss. Some insisted it was Jason calling out for help. Others swore it was another voice entirely whispering his name. The tape became a legend all on its own. Online forums dissected every single second of the leaked clip, filtering it, enhancing it, adding subtitles that claimed to reveal hidden words. For Jason's parents, it was completely unbearable. They wanted only peace, not another circus of endless speculation. But the story refused to die down. Investigators reviewed the autopsy report again, searching desperately for anything they might have overlooked. Jason's bones showed no signs of struggle, no fractures, no cuts anywhere. His sleeping bag had been zipped from the inside, and his body lay exactly as though he had simply closed his eyes. One ranger, carefully reviewing photographs of the site, noticed something deeply unsettling. Faint indentations in the soil just beyond the tent. They were not animal prints, not quite. They resembled footprints, but longer, narrower, too distorted to measure accurately. When asked about them, the sheriff shrugged it off casually. After 12 years of rain, erosion makes ghosts out of mud. Still, a quiet unease hung in the air. Searchers who had been there in '94 could not understand how the tent had escaped their notice. The coordinates of the discovery were barely half a mile from one of the original search grids. "We were right there," one volunteer said during an interview. "I swear we looked through that whole stretch." That fall, Jason's parents held a small memorial service at a community church. Neighbors arrived, bringing flowers, photographs, and quiet words of condolence. His mother placed the rusted lantern on the altar, its glass now fogged and cracked. She said she could not bring herself to clean it. The dirt covering it was the last thing that had touched her son. Outside, rain fell softly against the windows. After the service, a reporter approached her, asking what she thought about the rumors surrounding the tape. She said nothing at first, then whispered very quietly, "Jason was not alone out there. I know that now." A few months later, a local news crew returned to the campsite to film a segment for the anniversary of the discovery. They found the area already changed dramatically, branches cleared away, moss stripped away by curious visitors. But one cameraman swore that when he replayed a section of his footage later, he heard faint music beneath the sound of his own breathing. He deleted the clip that same night. The official story settled firmly on exposure as the cause of death, but the unofficial one grew louder with each retelling. People said Jason's Walkman still worked when it was first discovered, its play button pressed halfway down as if stopped mid-song. Others claimed the cassette was not one of his, that the handwriting on the label did not match his neat, blocky handwriting style. Whatever the real truth, one thing remained constant: the sense that something or someone had been with Jason during those final hours. For a while after the memorial, life in Tacoma began drifting back toward ordinary rhythms. The Whitakers returned to work. Neighbors stopped leaving casseroles at their doorstep, and the media moved toward newer stories. Yet something in that forest refused to rest. The following spring, hikers began reporting strange things near the site where Jason's tent had been discovered. One couple swore they heard music echoing faintly through the trees, not modern music, but something tiny and warped, like a cassette playing underwater. Another man said he found a red thermos sitting upright on a rock beside the trail. When he returned with a ranger an hour later, it had vanished. Locals started calling that stretch of forest Whitaker Hollow. Some went there from curiosity, others from morbid fascination. They found nothing solid, only the heavy quiet of moss and rain, but nearly everyone who stayed long enough came back with the same feeling. The woods were listening. For the Whitakers, the questions never stopped. Jason's father refused to believe his son had simply died from exposure. He knew how to start a fire, he told a journalist. He had food, shelter, supplies. He was smart. He would not just lie down and give up. His mother, quieter but equally certain, said she often dreamed of Jason standing outside their house, lantern in hand, his face lit by the flickering yellow glow. He never spoke in those dreams, but he always looked like he wanted to. The sheriff's department closed the case that summer, listing the cause of death as undetermined environmental exposure. But off the record, several deputies admitted they did not buy it. "There's something off about that tape," one said. "You can scrub the noise all you want. It still sounds like someone whispering in the background." The cassette, along with Jason's other things, was eventually returned to his parents. They placed it in a small cedar box beside framed photographs of him as a child. The Walkman itself, still rusted and warped from time, sat on the mantel above the fireplace, its buttons frozen in place. Every so often, when the house went quiet, his mother swore she could hear a faint mechanical click coming from inside it. The sound of a play button being pressed again and again, even though nobody was touching it. Over time, the legend spread far beyond Washington. Campers whispered it around fires, swapping versions that grew darker with each retelling. Some claimed Jason had recorded his own death. Others said the cassette contained the voice of whoever or whatever had been standing outside his tent that night. By the 20th anniversary of his disappearance, the case had crossed into folklore. The boy who went camping alone and came back only as a story. In 2018, a podcast covering unsolved Northwest mysteries revisited the case. The host played what he said was the original recovered audio from Jason's tape. Listeners described hearing more than static. Faint breathing, a crackle like nylon shifting, then 3 syllables drawn out slowly, low and uneven. The host cut the recording short, his voice shaking as he said, "Whatever this is, it is not wind." Authorities denied the authenticity of the clip, claiming the real tape had never left evidence custody. The Whitakers stayed silent, but those who had heard it firsthand claimed it matched perfectly. By the 30th anniversary in 2024, the Carbon River Valley had become a place of uneasy pilgrimage. People left cassette tapes, lanterns, and thermoses at the tree line like offerings. The forest, still damp and green, swallowed them in silence. If you walk the trail at dusk, you might find the old clearing, the one where Jason pitched his tent for the first and last time. The ground there feels softer than the rest, and when the wind moves through the pines, it carries a faint metallic hum like a tape beginning to play. And if you listen closely, just before the sound fades, you might hear a voice whisper 3 syllables you cannot quite understand. Maybe it is the forest, maybe it is the past, or maybe after all these years, Jason Whitaker is still out there, caught forever in the hiss of his own recording.